we have to let go of our first love? In September 1969, I was a college sophomore at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Berkeley of the Midwest. Through the 60s, it was a center of political activism, and I was a small part of that. It was also a center of intellectual and cultural sophistication, and I loved it. In the fall, I met my new roommate, Lisa, and I wasn't sure how we were going to get along because she was very different from me. In background, she had been raised in Ann Arbor, and her parents were university professors and practically communists. She had done every imaginable drug in high school, so she was done with drugs by the time she got to college. She was an art major and did large abstract paintings and was very intense. I, on the other hand, had been raised in a strict Catholic family in a medium-sized town in Indiana. My parents had a mixed marriage, which meant that my father was a Republican and my mother was a Democrat. I was a psychology major, bent on being a psychoanalyst, and a philosophy minor, bent on being an intellectual. We looked really differently also. She wore really bright colors, like a hippie, and tie-dyed tunic tops with flowing sleeves and bell bottoms. And even in the Michigan cold weather, she wore sandals. She wore a scarf around her head, and she was rather pale and pretty, with the longest dark strawberry dishwater blonde hair. It was the longest hair I'd ever seen. She could sit on it. I really envied that hair. She made her own jewelry, and you could hear her coming a mile away. I, on the other hand, had just switched in the spring from wearing matching A-line villager skirts that my mother and I had picked out for my back-to-college wardrobe. I was into looking like an intellectual, which meant that I wore the same blue jeans, the same denim shirt, and my beloved Army surplus green jacket all the time. It never changed my clothes. And my hair, like now, it was brown, but it would never grow out. It never got past shoulder length. I had stopped wearing makeup, and I was intense. We were both good students and quite intense. Gradually, we discovered that we had a passion in common, and that was any film in a foreign language that had subtitles. Love them, especially the new wave French films that were coming out, and the films of Truffaut. She liked to analyze the style and the artistry. I liked to find the sexual innuendos and Oedipal undertones of everything. I was really into Freud. Very, very into Freud. Well, we went to lots of films together, and by September, we were really good friends and talked about a lot of other things as well. One day, in September, she came into our room, all excited, carrying a newspaper. Janet, have you been on campus yet? Have you seen the Michigan Daily? It's got a great big story. It says that Paul McCartney is dead. Your favorite Beatle, he's dead. Oh my God. He was my favorite Beatle. I saw him twice at the Indiana State Fair. How did he die so young? He was in a car crash in England. He died instantly. Oh my God, that's horrible. What happened? How could it happen? Janet, not only is he dead, he's been dead for 3 angrily, and he drove his sports car out into the countryside, and he missed a stop sign, and bam! He was killed instantly. Well, they called the Beatles manager, and the Beatles got together. And they decided it was too horrible, and they would have to break it to their fans gently. Clues in their music. So they got this guy, William Campbell, who had won a Paul McCartney look-alike contest, and they gave him some singing lessons. He's been masquerading as Paul quite successfully ever since. Successfully? There's nobody like Paul. Well, yes, there is. When you read this article, it's incredible, because the clues are all there in the songs. Like, you know the song, Got to Get You Into My Life? It has a line, I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. That's the lead up to the accident. And then, you know, in A Day in the Life, it goes, he blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. That's the accident. And, you know, it happened on a Wednesday at 5 a.m. There's that line, Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock, the day begins. And in Lady Madonna, Wednesday morning, papers didn't come. I just looked at her. I was kind of skeptical, but I was eager to read the article. It turned out on campus, everybody was reading that article, which had details of clues in songs and other ways that proved that Paul was dead and had been dead for a long time. That afternoon, she came into our room, all excited again. This shows it visually. I checked out the visual clues. And you know Abbey Road, the album that just came out that's being reviewed that we were going to get? Well, I got it. And on this cover are the Beatles. But you notice the Beatles are all dressed differently. And that's because they're going to a funeral. We have John dressed in white to be holy and to be the preacher man. We have Ringo dressed in a black suit because he's the undertaker. Then there's Paul in his regular clothes, but he's out of step with the others. And you'll notice he's barefoot, like how they bury people. And then we have George in his work clothes because he's the grave digger. Not only that, so many clues in one picture. Paul is smoking, but it's in his right hand. Everybody knows that Paul is left-handed and always smokes with his left hand. And this car back here has a license plate that's very suspicious. It says LMW 28I. That means, Janet, Linda McCartney Weeks, 28 if he had lived. That's Paul. He's dead. And then, you know, Sergeant Pepper's came out a while ago, and we all puzzled over all of the detail and the way it had many themes and possibilities. Well, there's really just one theme, and that is about Paul being dead. Of course, you notice Paul's right here in the center, and above him are hands of death. He's the only one with hands of death above him. Down here is Shiva, the goddess of destruction, and she's pointing straight at Paul. This is clearly a gravesite with many things, but the largest thing, besides the name of the Beatles, is a left-handed bass guitar. This could only be Paul's guitar, a left-handed bass guitar, right there. Aston Martin toy sports car. That's the one Paul died in, right there. Now, inside, this is a huge clue. Here we have the Beatles in their Sgt. Pepper's uniform. But Paul is the only one with a black armband. And the black armband says OPD. That stands in British for officially pronounced dead. Which is similar to English for dead on arrival. You know that. Okay? That's proof. And then on the back, his back is to us, like he's gone away. He's the only one with his back to the rest. Well, that was a lot of information. I went on campus, and everywhere people continue to read and talk about the article and look for clues. The story got picked up by a New York radio station that was broadcast nationwide, and in fact internationally. And everyone was talking about clues. It was in Time and Newsweek. It became a real craze all through September. In October, I came into our room, and there was Lisa, huddled down, listening to the Beatle albums and songs very slowly. Forwards and backwards. And I sat with her. And I'll be darned if there's a song called I'm So Tired, where John Lennon, for example, sings, Monsieur, 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 how about another one? When you listen to that backwards, it really clearly says, Paul is a dead man. Miss him, miss him, miss him. And we listened to the White Album, had an experimental song that was just noises and street noises, but one big part was a 9-minute song. One big part of this 9-minute song was a crash followed by an explosion that went on forever. Well, when you listen to that backwards, and this is on YouTube, folks, when you listen to that backwards, it clearly says, Paul is dead. And then later it says, turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man. I heard it really clearly. Well, I don't know. My skepticism was starting to go down a little bit, listening to those backwards, that something was going on. A little later, I was walking down State Street, close to campus, when in a newsstand I saw a Life magazine cover in November. This is in November. And it was a black and white picture of Paul and Linda McCartney. The lead article was an interview with Paul by a British journalist who had found Paul's farm in the bogs of Scotland and was granted a brief interview with Paul. In the interview, Paul said that he hadn't been giving many interviews or doing very much lately, and that's probably why this craze and rumor that he was dead had arisen. He said that the clues were all just bogus, that the black arm patch was for Ontario Police Department, which was a town nearby where they did that picture. He said that people who were putting all this energy into finding clues really ought to get a life of their own. And that he had moved on. Paraphrasing Mark Twain, he said, reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. Although he added, if I were dead, I would probably be the last to know. He said that the Beatle thing was over, and the world didn't pick up on that. They couldn't believe it until about 6 months later, because the Beatles did go on to have separate solo careers. The Life magazine article changed our opinions. For much of the world, it settled it. And for Lisa and me, we moved on. It turned out that Fred LeBoeuf, who'd written the original Michigan Daily article, had made up most of the clues and had intended the piece to be satirical in the beginning. And was amazed that it got picked up and became a nationwide thing. Lisa moved on. We stayed good friends, but Lisa moved on, and I think the next semester she was really into Hare Krishna and eating only macrobiotic brown rice and celery. She continued to do her art intensely, but she dressed differently as a Hare Krishna. I changed and turned against Freud and got interested in community mental health, and I started to wear makeup again and change my clothes once in a while. My musical taste changed too, but I always played the Beatles. I always loved the Beatles, and I followed Paul McCartney avidly. Paul McCartney and Wings were among my favorites. I loved Paul's lyrical, wonderful voice, his lyrics, his love songs, and his ballads. I've always loved Paul, and I always will love Paul.